So today we're diving into something
Oh, yeah.
that I think we all know is important,
Mm,
but it can be like incredibly difficult to deal with,
yeah,
especially when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one.
right.
Probate in North Carolina.
Yes.
We've got a stack of legal guides and articles here,
Mm-hmm.
and our mission today is to really try to help you make sense of this process,
Yeah,
which can often be really complex
right.
and kind of give you a roadmap
Mm,
for navigating this whole legal and emotional maze.
yeah,
So you feel more prepared and in control during what's already a really difficult time.
and that's so important because on top of the grief and the loss,
Exactly.
having to deal with all this legal stuff
Yeah.
can just feel so overwhelming.
It really
Mm.
can.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is probate?
Okay, so think of probate as basically the court stepping in
Okay.
to oversee the distribution of a deceased person's assets. So making sure that their debts are paid, their property is all accounted for, and that their wishes are honored as much as possible,
Right.
either through a will if they have one,
Okay.
or according to state law if they don't.
So it's almost like a safety net to make sure everything is handled
Yeah.
fairly and legally.
Exactly. It protects the rights of everyone involved,
Okay.
from creditors to beneficiaries.
Gotcha. Now, do all estates have to go through probate?
Not necessarily. It really depends on the types of assets
Okay.
and how they were structured.
Okay.
So, for instance, if assets are held in a trust,
Okay.
they might bypass probate entirely,
Okay.
which is one of the big advantages of setting up a trust.
Yeah,
It can really streamline things
Yeah.
for your loved ones.
that's good to know.
Hmm.
But for the cases where probate is necessary,
Yeah,
our sources mention all these different roles.
right.
Executor, administrator, trustee.
Mm.
It's like a whole cast of characters.
Yes, it is.
Can you help us figure out who's who?
Of course. So let's start with the executor. So that's the person named in the will
Oh,
to basically be the captain of the probate ship.
okay.
They carry out the deceased person's instructions.
Oh.
They work with the court,
Mhm.
and they make sure everything is distributed according to the will.
So they're like the project manager
Exactly.
for settling the estate.
Yeah,
Now, if there's no will,
right. If there is no will, the court appoints an administrator
okay,
to do the same job.
okay.
So same responsibilities,
But
just a different title.
What about the trustee?
Okay, so the trustee, think of them as the guardian of any assets that are held in a trust.
Okay.
So they manage those assets
Mm-hmm.
and distribute them according to the terms of the trust document.
Okay.
So they have a very specific role,
Okay.
separate from the executor or administrator.
So you could have both an executor and a trustee working on the same estate.
Absolutely. It all depends on how the deceased person structured their estate plan.
Wow. Okay.
And then, of course, you have the beneficiary. Those are the people or organizations
Yeah.
who will inherit the asset.
Right. The folks who ultimately benefit from the whole process.
Exactly.
So we've got our key players.
We do.
But how long does this whole probate show typically run in North Carolina?
Well, our sources say you're looking at a minimum of 6 months in North Carolina.
Yep.
Creditors have 90 days to file claims.
Mm.
And even for small estates, it usually takes about a year.
Wow. So even a straightforward case
Right.
can take a while.
It can, and it can take even longer if the estate is complex.
Okay. Okay.
Lots of property or investments or businesses.
Hmm.
And of course, any disputes or challenges
Right.
can drag things out even further.
I bet.
Yeah.
So let's say probate is necessary.
Okay.
What are some of the steps involved in navigating the probate court?
Well, it starts with a petition to the court
Okay.
to open probate.
Okay.
Then the will, if there is one, has
Right.
to be validated.
Okay.
And the executor or administrator is officially appointed. And they actually get this document called letters testamentary,
Okay.
which is basically their authorization from the court
Right.
to act on behalf of the estate.
So it's like their official badge from the probate police.
You could say that.
Okay.
And from there, the court oversees the whole process,
Uh-huh.
makes sure everything is done by the book,
Mm-hmm.
handles any challenges that come up,
Okay.
and ultimately make sure the assets are distributed correctly.
It all sounds incredibly complex,
It is.
especially if you're also dealing with,
Right.
the emotional weight of losing someone.
Absolutely, it can be.
Yeah.
And that's where having an experienced probate attorney can make a world of difference.
Right. Our sources really emphasize how much a good lawyer can help.
Yeah.
What specific services do they typically provide?
They can handle all sorts of things.
Okay.
They'll work directly with the court.
Uh-huh.
They'll gather and value the assets, pay off debts,
Okay.
distribute inheritances. They'll also deal with notifying creditors, managing trust assets, and even modifying trusts if needed.
Wow.
It's like having a legal expert by your side guiding you through every step.
So they're like your probate Sherpa.
Exactly.
Leading you through the legal mountains.
Yeah. They know the terrain, they know the rules, and they can help you avoid costly mistakes.
And I imagine they can also handle any disputes or challenges
Absolutely.
that come up, which,
Right.
let's face it, can happen.
They do happen.
Especially when families are involved.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of unique challenges,
Yeah.
some of our sources mention some specific things
Okay.
that can make probate in North Carolina a little bit tricky,
Right.
like dealing with a spousal allowance
Yeah.
or a dependent allowance,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't really explain what those are.
Right.
Do you have any insights?
Yeah, so those are definitely terms specific to North Carolina law, and they're designed to protect the surviving spouse and dependents during probate.
Okay.
The spousal allowance, for example, allows the surviving spouse to take certain property immediately,
Oh.
even before the will is fully settled.
Oh, interesting. So even if the will leaves everything to someone else,
Right.
the spouse can still claim some specific items.
Exactly. It's meant to provide some immediate support and prevent the surviving spouse from being left with nothing
Right.
while the probate process plays out.
That's a good example of how state-specific laws can really come into play.
They do.
Okay. Anything else about North Carolina probate that kind of stands out?
Well, North Carolina also has something called the surviving spouse elective share.
Oh, right. One of our sources mentioned that.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Okay, so it's designed to protect the surviving spouse's inheritance rights, even if the will leaves them very little or even nothing at all.
Okay.
It basically allows the surviving spouse to choose to receive a certain percentage of the deceased spouse's estate. Okay. Regardless of what the will says.
Wow. So even if the will cuts the spouse out completely,
Yes.
they can still claim a portion of the estate.
Exactly. It's a way for North Carolina law to recognize the contributions of a spouse during the marriage
Right.
and ensure they're not left high and dry.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It seems like probate law really takes those family dynamics into account.
It does, and these nuances are exactly why having legal guidance can be so helpful.
Right.
A probate attorney can explain all the ins and outs, make sure your rights are protected, and help you navigate the process with confidence.
All right, so we've covered the basics of what probate is,
Right.
the key players involved, and some of the things that can make it tricky in North Carolina.
Yep.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah. You know, if you're dealing with the loss of a loved one and facing probate in North Carolina, just know that you're not alone.
Right.
There are experienced probate attorneys out there,
Yeah.
like those at the Pierce Law Group. Right.
Who can provide compassionate guidance and make this process as smooth as possible.
That's a great point. And we'll be sure to share their contact information
Yes.
at the end of the episode for anyone who needs help.
Absolutely.
But for now,
Okay.
let's take a quick break.
All right.
And then come back to explore some of the potential challenges
Okay.
you might encounter during probate
Yeah.
and how to overcome them.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into probate in North Carolina.
All right, so we've got the basics down.
Right.
But as we hinted at earlier, probate can get a little, well, messy.
Yes, it can.
Right.
Our sources highlight some common challenges that can crop up. And honestly, some of them sound like they're straight out of a family drama.
I know. Lost wills, family feuds,
Right.
people refusing to leave the house.
Yeah.
It sounds like a recipe for stress on top of everything else
Absolutely.
that's going on.
So let's break down some of these challenges.
And more importantly, how to deal with them.
Right.
So let's start with the lost will scenario.
Okay.
You might think it's rare,
Uh-huh.
but it happens more often than you'd expect.
Imagine people moving, maybe forgetting where they put important documents,
Right.
or maybe something happens to the will itself.
Yeah.
A fire, a flood.
Exactly. And when a will can't be found,
Yeah.
things get a bit trickier.
Okay.
The estate is then considered intestate,
Okay.
which basically means it will be divided up according to North Carolina law,
Okay.
not necessarily the deceased person's wishes.
So there's a default plan in place.
Right.
But it might not be what the person actually wanted.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Which is why having a will and keeping it in a safe, accessible place is so important.
Okay.
It gives you control even after you're gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But let's say a will is found.
Okay.
Are there still potential problems?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what?
Family members might question the will's validity. They might argue the person wasn't mentally sound when they made it,
Okay.
or that someone pressured them into leaving things a certain way.
Wow. So probate court can turn into like a real battleground.
It can, unfortunately,
Yeah.
especially when emotions are running high and money is involved.
Right.
That's where having an experienced probate attorney becomes essential.
I can see how having a neutral third party to kind of mediate those disputes could be a lifesaver.
Exactly. They can help gather evidence,
Mm-hmm.
make sure everyone's rights are protected,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully guide everyone towards a resolution that's fair and legal.
Speaking of fairness, let's talk about something specific to North Carolina
Okay.
that came up in our sources.
Okay.
The surviving spouse elective share.
Right. This is a provision that protects the surviving spouse's inheritance rights,
Okay.
even if the will doesn't leave them much
Oh.
or anything at all.
Wait, so even if the will specifically excludes the spouse,
Yes,
they can still claim part of the estate?
that's right. North Carolina law recognizes the contributions spouses make during a marriage
Okay.
and wants to make sure the surviving spouse isn't left
Right.
in a difficult financial situation.
So even with a will, things aren't always set in stone.
Not entirely, especially when it comes to protecting the surviving spouse.
Okay.
And that's just one example of how North Carolina law adds another layer
Right.
to probate.
It definitely highlights the importance of understanding those state-specific rules,
Yeah,
which is where an attorney can really come in handy.
absolutely. They're like your probate GPS
Okay.
and navigating you through all the twists and turns.
Now, there's one more challenge we have to address.
Okay.
The situation where someone, maybe a family member,
Right?
is living in the deceased person's home
Uh-huh.
and refuses to leave.
Mm.
How does probate handle that kind of situation?
Well, the executor or administrator is in charge of the estate's assets,
Right.
including real estate,
Okay.
but evicting someone,
Yeah.
even if they have no legal right to be there.
Can be very tricky.
So what can be done? Do you just have to wait it out?
Well, that's where, again, a probate attorney can help.
Okay.
They might be able to negotiate a move-out agreement,
Okay.
or in some cases, they might need to go to court
Right.
to get the person removed.
It sounds like probate is all about dealing with the unexpected.
It is.
And having the right legal guidance can make a huge difference
Absolutely.
in navigating those challenges.
It's like having a probate toolkit
Right.
with all the right tools for the job.
All right, so we've covered some of the common challenges.
We have.
But let's get back to the practical side of things.
Okay.
If someone finds themselves facing probate in North Carolina,
Right.
what are their first steps? What should they do to kind of get the process started?
Well, the first step is to figure out if probate is actually necessary.
Okay.
That's something an attorney can help determine.
Okay.
If it is needed, then they'll guide you through filing the initial paperwork with the court.
Which basically starts the whole probate clock ticking.
So finding an experienced probate attorney early on
Yes.
is really key.
It's one of the most important things you can do.
Okay.
They can help you understand your responsibilities,
Uh-huh.
make sure you meet all the deadlines,
Yeah.
and just generally provide peace of mind that things are being handled correctly.
And what about the emotional side of things? Because let's be honest, dealing with probate,
Right.
on top of losing a loved one,
It is.
can be incredibly overwhelming.
Absolutely. It's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
And that's where attorneys like those at the Pierce Law Group can really shine.
Okay.
They understand the sensitive nature of probate
Uh-huh.
and can provide compassionate support throughout the entire process.
That's so important. It's not just about the legal expertise.
Right.
It's about having someone who understands what you're going through
Exactly.
and can guide you with empathy.
And speaking of the Pierce Law Group,
Yeah.
they have a great resource on their website that walks you through the steps of probate in North Carolina.
Okay.
And they even offer a free consultation
Oh, wow.
to discuss your specific situation.
That's fantastic. We'll definitely make sure our listeners
Wait.
have all that information
Yes.
at the end of the episode.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
let's touch on a few more things
All right.
that can trip people up during probate.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
What else should our listeners be aware of? Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been wading through the sometimes murky waters of probate in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're feeling a bit more informed about the process and how to navigate it.
And maybe even a bit empowered.
Yeah.
Because knowledge is power.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with legal matters.
So true. We've covered a lot of ground.
Mm-hmm.
But before we wrap things up, I want to bring it back to our listeners.
Okay.
Why does all of this matter to them?
Right.
even if they're not currently dealing with probate?
That's a great question. Probate might seem like something you only worry about when you're older.
Right.
But planning ahead even now can save your loved ones a lot of stress and heartache down the road.
Yeah, it's like leaving them a roadmap instead of a maze.
Exactly. Having a well-thought-out estate plan,
Right.
including a will and potentially a trust, can ensure that your wishes are honored and your assets are distributed according to your plan.
And as we've discussed, having an experienced probate attorney by your side can be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely.
They can help make sure everything is done correctly, efficiently, and with the least amount of stress for everyone involved.
They can be your advocate, your guide, and your source of support
Right.
during a potentially difficult time.
So what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to remember today?
Don't wait. Start planning for the future now.
Okay.
Talk to your loved ones, consult with an attorney, and get those plans in place.
Yeah.
It's one of the most important gifts you can give yourself and your family.
It's about taking control and providing peace of mind, both for yourself and those you care about most.
Exactly. And remember, probate is a natural part of life,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be overwhelming or contentious.
Right.
With the right knowledge and preparation, it can be a smooth transition.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into probate in North Carolina.
Yes.
We hope you found this information helpful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Remember, you don't have to face this alone.
Right?
There are experienced professionals, like the team at the Pierce Law Group,
Right.
who can guide you every step of the way.
We'll be sure to include their contact information in the show notes so you can reach out if you need help.
And remember, planning for the future is one of the most caring things you can do for your loved ones.
Until next time, deep divers keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.